Welcome to the 337th episode of the Reading and Writing Podcast. Stay tuned for my interview with thriller author Marc Cameron. Cameron has written the Jericho Quinn series, the Arliss Cutter series, and he's also taken over writing the Jack Ryan series based on the iconic Tom Clancy character. Stay tuned for my interview with Marc Cameron. If you're new to audiobooks, they're the perfect way to get more books into your busy life. Listen to audiobooks during your commute, while doing chores, walking the dog, or just relaxing at home. All you need is a smartphone and the free Libro.fm app. If you already love audiobooks and don't know what to listen to next, check out recommendations and curated lists from people who know audiobooks best, your local bookseller. Reading and Writing Podcast special offer. Get 2 audiobooks for the price of 1 with your first month of membership with code RWPodcast. That's code RWPodcast for 2 audiobooks for the price of 1 for your first month of membership at Libro.fm. Welcome back to the Reading and Writing Podcast. My guest today is Marc Cameron, author of the new crime thriller novel Stone Cross. Marc is the author of many thriller novels. He's also written additional Jack Ryan novels in the Tom Clancy series. Marc, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, thanks, Jeff.
Well, if someone listening hasn't heard about Stone Cross yet, how would you describe the novel?
Well, I retired after 22 years from the United States Marshal Service, and probably the last 12 were in Alaska. And I traveled all around the state, and I was already writing Westerns at the time, but just seeing the varied geography and cultures and that sort of thing around the state of Alaska made me really want to write books where Alaska was a major character. And the Arliss Cutter and Lola Tauriki protagonists in this are all over the state of Alaska in the series. The first one goes down to southeast Alaska on Prince of Wales. The second one's out in western Alaska in the Yupik Eskimo areas out there in western Alaska, where I did quite a bit of work with my fellow deputies and the Alaska State Troopers. So these are, if they're out of 21 or 22 books that I've written or ghost written over the years, Stone Cross has the most of me in it, if you will. It's a murder mystery. It's a book about culture. It's a book about my friends in the native communities in western Alaska and my friends in law enforcement. It's pretty near and dear to me.
So how has your Marshal Service experience with law enforcement informed your novels and writing? Because you do write in the thriller and crime genre.
Sure. I really try hard to write the kind of book that I would enjoy reading and that my friends would enjoy reading, but also the kind of book that teaches about even though admittedly they're over the top, some of them in the adventure department, some of my earlier thriller novels, the Jericho Quinn series, I always like to describe them as plausible as far as the laws of physics go, but certainly not probable in some of the things that happen. But they're fun and fun to write as far as the Mission Impossible-esque kind of stories. But the Arliss Cutter thrillers are a little more down to earth, a little more gritty, more in line with what I saw in my law enforcement life. So I really try to get the fight scenes right. I try to get the human conflict right, even if it's not necessarily, fists and feet physical. I try to get that human conflict realistic. I try to get the weapons right, and the cultures right. I mean, I've got a son, and both my sons were in law enforcement. One has gone on to medical school, but one son's still in law enforcement, and we have plenty of talks about how this is the people business, and writing is the people business, about observation. And so I think being in law enforcement for almost 30 years and being an observer of people really maybe lent itself to my writing. At least I hope it did.
And so, do you remember the original idea that led you to writing Stone Cross?
I do. I had been out to Western Alaska, and when I say Western Alaska, I mean I'm really talking about a place that we up here called the YK Delta. Most people have heard of the Yukon River that swoops out of Canada and makes sort of a big shallow U up in the top part of Alaska, and then the Kuskokwim River is sort of a mirror image of that, and they almost bow together, and then they spread out again and form a big delta in between them. That's kind of marshy muskeg area that's about the size of Oregon, and that's populated by I want to say about 200 villages. Some of them very small, about 50 something larger. When I say larger, I mean 800 or 900 people, villages of Native Alaskans. And I have a good friend that's a trooper, and he was the commander over the Alaska State Troopers in that area. And he came to me when I was the chief deputy and said, "Let's go out and do some good out there together and join forces and see if we can help out." And we did quite a bit of work out there with literacy and some youth camps and things like that. But I spent a lot of time out there and saw the issues that these folks um, face every day in these places that are not accessible by road at all. You have to fly there, or if you're on the coast, take a boat, but that's frozen much of the year. So these are very isolated areas with a lot of really hard problems when it comes to just getting water and sewage lines and things like that, and law enforcement issues and domestic abuse and all of that. And so I just saw it as a interesting place to set a thriller with somebody like Arliss Cutter, who's a bit of a fish out of water. He's from Florida, and so he's learning about Alaska at the same time the readers do. And I spent a lot of nights on a sleeping in a sleeping bag on the floor of the library or the home ec room or different classrooms in villages out there, because the school is often the center of the cultural activity and community activity out there. And just started really because, as I said, I was a writer from way early on, even back when I was a uniformed police officer. And there's just a lot of being out there that spoke to me about these interesting cultures.
And so, do you keep a list of ideas for future novels, or do you start thinking about your next novel while you're writing the one before it? How does that work for you?
That's a really good question. I have an what yeah, I think it's probably an endless list of novels. The research for, like, I'm in the middle of working on a Tom Clancy novel now, my fourth effort in the Jack Ryan series, and um, that I took over from Mark Graney when he recommended me for it. And as I write along and do research, I'll think, oh wow, that'd make a good little scene or good story, but it certainly doesn't fit in this book. And so I have a file, both written and both handwritten and on my computer, where I just jot that idea down and get back to my work in progress. Otherwise, I'd go down too many rabbit trails. But being out and somebody will say something interesting or make a turn of phrase, and I'll think, wow, that just really has some story behind it. And there's a little part in the book, and it's in Stone Cross, and um, a friend of mine, I didn't actually hear it in person. A friend of mine was telling me about it, where he works in the schools out there, and he was talking about two Native women talking about how they used to have a parade. They used to do this in the village. They used to do that. And one of the women said, wow, I wonder why they don't do that anymore. And the women said, well, I guess we're they. We are the ones that need to do that. And we're not doing it. And when I'm listening to them talk and seeing the issues they have out there, I thought, that really fits into what I want to write about, the changing of the cultures and the old versus the new. And so I just hear little bits and pieces out there. I might even, one of the fight scenes that's in that book, and I won't go into exactly which one, but one of the fight scenes out in the village that Arliss comes upon is a bit of conflict that I was involved in personally with that trooper friend I was telling you about when we went to a specific village. And I thought after that was over, boy, this really typifies some of the things that we see out here and that these people live with all the time. And I thought, as that was happening, I thought this is going to spark a scene in a book someday.
So, what are your earliest memories of reading in books?
Oh, my father was a teacher. My mother was a teacher. My aunt was a librarian. And we lived across the country from one another. I grew up in Texas mainly. My aunt lived in Salt Lake City. She was one of the head librarians of the Salt Lake City Public Library System. And so we would drive back and forth to the Rocky Mountains to Texas every year. And she would give me boxes of discarded books, like fruit boxes full of books that the library was getting rid of. And I just devoured. I was reading chapter books early, like second and third grade, reading I still have quite a few of those early Hardy Boys that are the Hardy Boys books that were on the shelves when I was growing up were blue and black. They were really nice, kind of a blue and black set. And I have the early brown covered set before they changed the wording from Old Chum and stuff like that. So I was reading the early first edition Hardy Boys when I was in the third grade, and right in the middle of, so I'd have been about 8 years old, right in the middle of my third grade year, my aunt went to a library convention, and Wilson Rawls was there, the author of Where the Red Fern Grows, and she got me a signed copy of. And I grew up in the country, so I had dogs and hunted and fished and all. I had my own gun when I was 9, and I can imagine my grandkids walking around the ranch with a shotgun now. But my parents were not helicopter parents, so by the time I was 10, I had a shotgun and was out bringing rabbits home and stuff like that. So, but at 8, my aunt saw this in me and gave me this copy of Where the Red Fern Grows, and I just cried my eyes out. And I took it to my third grade teacher and begged her to read it to the class, and she did. And I had kind of a crush on her, and so I remember watching her cry her eyes out and thinking, "Wow, these books really, they can make a difference." And I guess that's my earliest memory of thinking I might want to write some stories like this. So all my early stories in little spiral notebooks and legal pads that my mom kept me supplied with, much of the writing was done on those long drives back and forth to visit my family, extended family in Louisiana, and then back in the Rocky Mountains. And I mostly wrote derivative, Where the Red Fern Grows-esque kind of boy and his dog kind of stories, like most writers do. I think we copy the early writings.
So I'm curious. I mean, given that you, I was wondering, given that you wrote these early stories, which you described as derivative, what was the eventual path to publication for you to writing and publishing your first novel?
Well, I wrote a couple of locally published stories up here in Alaska, and then I wrote a Western, just a traditional, well, I guess semi-traditional Western. It was set in the mid 1900s, not back in the gunslinger times, but about the five. We were living in northern Idaho, and I was writing about. I did some man tracking with the U.S. Marshal Service, and so that interested me. And I have a friend that teaches tracking, and he's actually my jiu-jitsu sensei and good friend of mine. And we chatted about some different ideas. And so I wrote a Western that featured a tracking team back during the Geronimo campaigns, and then they're, as older men in their 40s, they get kind of recalled to solve a problem and track down save a girl that's been kidnapped in Montana during the huge fires that happened in 1910. A lot of people are not even aware of how bad the fires were in 1910, but they were so bad that the street lights came on in your neck of the woods because the ash got so bad in Montana that on the East Coast it just darkened the sky, and it like snowed in Denver in the middle of the summer, and it just was a real almost a nuclear winter. The fires were so bad, and so set
Wow.
that in the middle of this big. It's called the Big Blow Up. If anybody wants to look it up, the the tool that woodland firefighters use today, that's kind of a hooked axe called a Pulaski, is named after one of the Forest Service firefighters, kind of a hero of that fire. But anyway, so I set this Western in the middle of that fire and big tracking mission and all that, and worked on it. You know, I read and studied, and I read a lot over the course of my want to be writer's career while I was a police officer. And at this point, I'm still with the U.S. Marshals when I was writing these Westerns. And I had read virtually every book I read was like taking a college course to me. I read with a pencil. I take notes in the margins. I, take note of how, I have several Ken Follett novels that are just look like I used them for a master's thesis. They're just broken down and studied, and how he turns a phrase. And I did that with many books over the kind of self-studying, and then talking to any writer that I could. There's a science fiction writer in Weatherford, Texas, where I was a police officer, named Warren Norwood. He's since passed away, but his wife was a stringer for the local paper. And I found out that he was a published writer, and she put me in touch with him, and that would have been in my mid-20s. So I was really trying all this time and getting a ton of rejections. And so I talked to my wife. We were in Alaska, and I was a POD at the time, a plain old deputy. I hadn't promoted or anything. And so, we're kind of a young family, didn't have a whole lot of extra cash. And I said, I think this is something I could publish. How about if we invest some money and I go to Helena, Montana to a writers conference? And so I did, and I pitched the book, and one of the editors there from Kensington showed interest and asked me to send her 3 chapters. And then a couple of months later, she offered me a ghostwriting gig for another author. Said she wanted to publish mine, but she needed this done first, and then she'd try to schedule mine. And, it was a paid writing gig, so I was happy to do it. But then she was laid off and hadn't told anybody she was going to hire me. So I was like orphaned a week after I was hired. But then in between that time, she had given those 3 chapters to an incredibly wonderful literary agent named Robin Rue with Writer's House in New York. And Robin contacted me and said, so-and-so gave me your pages. I'd like to represent you, and let's work from here. I think we can get this ghostwriting gig done and also get your stuff published. And so I was just extremely fortunate to get one of the top agent, one of the finest agents I've ever even heard of. And there are many good agents in New York, but I'm very fortunate to have Robin in my corner. And so Robin's been my agent for 17 years now, and she's represented me in all my books.
That's a great story. So, as I mentioned at the beginning of the podcast and earlier, you've written novels in the Tom Clancy, Jack Ryan series, novels such as Code of Honor and Oath of Office and others. How did you begin writing Tom Clancy novels?
That's a really good question. I wrote, at that point, I'd written 7 Jericho Quinn novels. They're about an OSI agent. That, the best way to describe those is, in fact, I used to joke that they were much more like Cussler than they were Clancy, because they're a bit over the top, very high adventure. And I like Tom Clancy. I like Clive Cussler novels, but they are, I think people that write them and read them would admit they're different. But I had written 7 Jericho Quinn novels, and I wanted to kind of break out and do this switch over and kind of go back and forth and do these Arliss Cutters. And so I was at a conference in, I think, New Orleans, and Mark Graney, who was writing the Jack Ryan, Tom Clancy Jack Ryan novels at the time, and I had become friends over the years, going to BoucherCon writers conferences and Thriller Fest in New York writers conferences. So I was at a BoucherCon in New Orleans, and Mark and I were chatting in the bar where most of the business takes place at these things, and he said, how would you like it if I gave you a cover blurb?" And I was just gobsmacked. I hate asking other writers for cover quotes and cover blurbs because I know how busy we all are, and it really takes some time and to read other folks' books. And some writers are hesitant to do it just because you don't want to be derivative of, they write a great spy novel, and here, read my spy novel, and how come some of my stuff that sounds a lot like what I wrote ended up in your book, and so Mark coming to me and offering that was just a tremendously kind and generous thing to do. And so I said that'd be great. Sent him a e-copy of the the final proofs, or I guess before the final proofs, the first pass of Field of Fire, which was I think number 7, Jericho, and he wrote me a nice quote, and that was that. In fact, he wrote something that alluded to Clancy in the email to me, like, "Wow, this is really kind of Clancy-esque." And he was known for being the Clancy, the writer that took up the pen from Tom Clancy, even and worked with Clancy before Clancy passed away. And so, and then he has his own Gray Man series. This is just fantastic. So he wrote me back an email with a quote, and I went on my way. My wife and I had gone to Florida. We were researching some Arliss Cutter area scenes from where he grew up for the novels, and I was on the beach in Florida with my wife, and my cell phone rang, and it was Robin, my agent. And I guess my wife sensed at that time that something odd was going on because I had this pained look on my face. I don't know if she thought somebody had died or something's going on because she took a photo of me, and I'm standing on the beach and the wind's blowing. It's kind of overcast, and I look like I might be having an aneurysm or something. But Robin said that Mark had decided to step away and work on his own Gray Man series more and some other projects. And he had given the chapters that he had read to his publisher and recommended me for the Jack Ryans. And so I really owe it all to Mark pushing my name forward.
Wow, that's a great story. So how does the process of writing a Tom Clancy thriller novel differ than the other novels that you write?
Well, I think the process for me is the same. I'm quite an intense plotter. I have copious notes, and I write a lot longhand, either with pencils or a fountain pen, and so I have stacks. In fact, I'm sitting at my very cluttered desk right now, and I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 open yellow Rhodia or orange and yellow Rhodia notepads, and boxes of Blackwing 602 pencils that have just been sharpened, and a bunch of research material, and I'm just sort of covered up with mountain and a whiteboard in front of me. So I do a ton of research. Most of my books have maybe 3 subplot lines going through them, where a Clancy will have 5 to 7. And it's really like, to me, I write the stories out and sketch them out, those plot lines, and then it's kind of like shuffling a deck of cards. I spend a good deal of time shuffling those those individual scenes of those plots into the long story, so that you're switching back and forth, but the reader gets their appetite whetted, but maybe not completely satisfied. But we have to, and then before you move off to another subplot, to build up their interest in that subplot and almost get to the climax of that subplot, and then you move back to the other one. And the danger in that is that you don't want to make the reader mad, but you want to keep them reading. You want to get them excited about each of the subplots. If you just skipped away from the action and went to exposition, that's a crappy trick. That's just pulling the table out and wrecking all the tablecloth off and wrecking all the dishes and plates. But if you're able to switch away from action to more action, so wherever the reader is in the story, they're still interested and excited, then and I, obviously I'm not perfect, so I sometimes I look back and go, man, I wish I would have done that differently after it's in print. But I write the books the same way as far as the process. The Clancy's are much deeper in research. I make up some of the locations. For instance, in Stone Cross is based on some real villages, but it's not a real village. In the Clancy world, when I write about a town, it's most generally a real place, and it's something I've researched, either been to or interviewed somebody that's been to. I can't. So many people that read Tom Clancy's are reading it with a slide rule or a TI graphing calculator right next to them, making sure I get my physics right. Where people give me a little more leeway in the others.
And so, given your writing and all of the novels that you've written thus far, and your process that you mentioned earlier of taking that Ken Follett novel and basically turning it into a dissertation and breaking down each scene, and I'm curious, what writing advice would you offer for listeners who are writing their own stories and novels and would like to get them published?
Well, I tell everybody that asks me that question to just get words down on paper. Writing can be so debilitating, and I would say that 95% of the writers that I've met have this struggle between them, where we have the hubris to say what we want to say is important enough for you to read, but at the same time we're always trying to pull it back and say, but it's not very good, and we have self-doubt, and we're just constantly at odds with this read this, but you got to pry it out of my hands kind of a feeling, and a bit of an imposter syndrome. So the first thing that I tell people is just get some words down on paper. Hemingway, a dozen other writers have said, all first drafts are crap, so to speak. Let it be cruddy writing at first. You can fix it. You can't fix a blank sheet of paper. So if I can mull over and waste 3 hours of time switching the words around in a sentence and the sentences around in a paragraph, or I can slam out that paragraph and move on and get 7 paragraphs done or 20 paragraphs done, and then go back and fix them later after. Because sometimes, and this is a advice I've heard from other people, but I first heard it from Robin, my agent. She said, sometimes you got to write 3 chapters before you get to the first sentence of your book. And you'd never have gotten there had you not written those first 3 chapters. So my advice to people is sit down and tell that story. Don't so much worry about getting every craft and every you're and you're right, or there and there, or whatever. I don't get caught up in that. That's internet nastiness. Just write the story. Tell a good story, and the people will forgive you myriad mistakes, and you can go back and fix them. And the other thing I tell people, especially in this day and age, is get your nose out of your phone. You you have to observe the world. A really wise Texas Ranger once told me, we were working a bad homicide scene with a decaying body, and he squatted down beside me to look at the body, and the wind was kind of blowing away from us, and I was young. I was like 26 years old, my first homicide investigation as a young detective. And I said, Billy, tell me what to do. And he kind of cocked his hat back and took the toothpick out of his mouth. And he said, Marcus, just write down everything you see. And about that time, a fly blew off of the body into his mouth. And he didn't even skip a beat. He just picked the fly out of his teeth. And he said, Marcus, just write down everything you see and watch out for the blowflies. And I thought, man, that's got to go in a book someday. That's just amazing. That's the coolest guy I've ever met. But that's really what writing is all about. You're observing, you're watching out for the blowflies, but you're not watching out to stay away from them. You want to write about them. You just have to observe everything around you, and you got to get your phone out of your nose out of your phone in order to do that.
So, what novels or nonfiction books have you read recently that you really enjoyed?
Oh, let's see. Well, I'm doing a lot of research right now, so I'm reading a lot about in espionage and, and that sort of thing. As far as novels, I reread Norman Maclean's "A River Runs Through It" every year just to clean my brain. I think the prose in that is just so incredible. I read a book about submarine warfare called Blind Man's Bluff that's extremely interesting. That's probably the most interesting book that I've read in a long time. I read so much nonfiction, so much technical stuff. I draw a lot from my life for the work stuff, the gunfights and things like that. I don't read a lot of gun books and that sort of thing. I have a lot of guns and shoot a lot, but I, and I'm trying to, stay in touch with folks. But as far as reading, I honestly don't read a lot of thrillers either. I'm too busy writing them, and as I said before, I don't want to get derivative. I do read my friends' stuff. Mark Graney and a guy named Rip Rawlings, a retired Marine Lieutenant Colonel, wrote a book called Red Metal that I think is just one of the best books of the last several years. It reminds me of Red Storm Rising, one of the early Clancy books. So that's highly recommended. I just finished a book by Jack Carr called Savage Son. It's incredibly good. Another guy named Don Bentley. He's got a great new book out, or I guess it's been out a while. And Don's going to be writing with me. He's going to be writing the Jack Ryan Junior books, but his book that came out maybe 6 months ago is called Without Sanction. I got an early read of it, and I could tell when I read it he was going to be just a really good up and comer. And then of course they hired him to write the Jack Junior Clancy novels, so I was proven correct. Nick Petrie writes a really good story. Nick's a good example of somebody just telling a great story. He doesn't have a law enforcement background. He's got a construction background, but the guy knows human conflict. He knows human emotion, and he writes kind of in that Jack Reacher vein, kind of story, and tells a great story. So I read all his stuff. So other than that, I'm sure there's some I'm missing, but I read a ton of nonfiction. In order to keep two books a year coming out, I watch very little. We don't even have a television. We watch a few streaming shows. Mandalorian is a favorite, but and that's a very simple story. But mainly, I'm watching the movies in my head while I write these books.
Great. Well, where can people find you online if they'd like to learn more about you and your books?
Yeah, so they can email me through my website at Marc Cameron Books, Mark with a C, Cameron with a C, or I'm online. I'm on at Marc Cameron 1 on Twitter that I don't get on very often because, I'm too busy writing and don't really have a whole lot to tweet about except I'm writing or hiking in Alaska. On Instagram as Marc Cameron Author, and on Facebook as Marc Cameron Author. So any of those places. I don't check social media as much as I probably should, as much as my publicist would like me to, because I'm busy writing or with my grandkids when I have a chance. But I do answer all the emails, and I'm easy to find that way.
Great. Well, again, we've been speaking with Marc Cameron, author of the new thriller novel Stone Cross. The novel is available now, so go buy a copy. And Marc, thanks for doing this interview.
Hey, thanks a lot, Jeff. I appreciate your time.